and gentlemen, this is Josh Epstein, and I'm the Marketing Specialist for the TDA Perks program. In today's educational webinar, Phil Nieto with TDA Perks partner BestCard is going to be discussing trends in dentistry payments and also provide us with some insight into the credit card processing industry. I just want to let everyone know before we begin that BestCard has been the endorsed Perks vendor for credit card processing for over 8 years. They're well known for their personal approach and excellent member service. The webinar is being recorded today, so it's going to be available for later use. There'll also be a Q&A period at the conclusion of our session, and you can type your questions into the box there on your right, and I'll be happy to make sure Phil and I get to them. Please keep in mind that we do offer another 30 endorsed vendors for you to utilize, and of course we have our filled resource section with our recorded webinars and our posted TDA journal articles, our podcasts. So feel free to please come back and take a look at all that. But okay, without further ado, Phil, would you like to begin?
Sure. So basically, today we're going to take a look at basically how you guys accept payments in the practice. And my goal here, because I know this is something where you guys get sales calls all day long, is really to strip down the sales approach to it and just do a little bit of education on what exactly it is that you're paying for every time you run a card, things that you can do in the practice, things you can do when you choose a processor, just to make sure that, we know that you work hard. We want to make sure you're keeping as much of your money as possible. So when we look at it, basically, we've seen a big growth as far as the trend of, when you guys are getting payments, what are people you choosing to pay with? We've seen credit cards growing a lot in that sector. So, we kind of wanted to put together a webinar on just, making sure that you're meeting the needs of your bottom line. Just a little quick word on our company. Basically, BestCard was started as part of the Colorado Dental Association. They created an in-house program for their members. It got so popular that other states basically wanted to buy into the concept. And now we're our own company. We're endorsed by 23 different state dental associations right now, and TDA Perks has been they were one of our earliest partners, and they've been absolutely great with us. So basically, when we look at credit card payments, the things that we want to cover today is we want to kind of walk you through why it's important to understand your costs and why the savings might be more significant than you think. We want to go through tips to keep your monthly bill as low as possible. We want to explain exactly how the credit card industry pricing works so that you at least have a basic level of understanding the next time you look at it to know exactly what you're seeing. And last, we want to kind of walk you through common mistakes that can often lead to really high costs in the long run. So specifically, when we look at how dental offices are taking payments, we've seen a huge increase in the number of payments made by credit card in the dental office. So this chart is actually current up to this month. And what we've seen is since 2008, we've seen an increase of 66% in the average amount that a dental office is taking in credit cards. So in 2008, the average office was taking about $15,800 in cards. By 2017, that was $26,230. So really, when you look at what's driving that growth, it doesn't come down to a higher per transaction cost. We've actually seen that the average transaction cost in dentistry has been relatively stagnant. So that's the first graph there. You see from 2009 to 2017, it really hasn't had a big increase. But when you look on the second graph below, which is the average number of transactions that a dental practice ran in a month, it's almost doubled, right? So, you go from about 57 on average to about 105 in 2017 so far, or about 102. But basically, when you look at that, any part of your business that grows that quickly, you have to kind of really take a look at what you're paying on it and making sure that it's meeting your needs as a business owner. You're not there to make your credit card processor happy. It's, it should be the other way. So without further ado, we're going to jump into how to get the lowest credit card bill possible, right? So essentially the first part, and this is really important, we want to look at understanding what your processor is charging you and why. And the biggest part of that is understanding your costs, which is why later on we're going to dive into how processing costs are kind of figured out. Now with processors, you want to make sure that you're receiving as many debit cards as possible. Debit rates are so much lower than credit rates that the more of those you take, the happier you'll be. And that is even taking debit without putting in a PIN number. So just swiping a debit card, just like you would a credit card, should give you a much lower rate. Whether or not your processor is passing on their lower cost on that is, kind of a separate issue. 3, you want to understand what additional costs you might be paying. A lot of times you look at your statement and you see all kinds of different fees. Some are very, very small. Some might be very large monthly fees for services that you might even not be taking advantage of. And then last, and this is kind of a difficult one, but basically with a credit card processor, there are so many ways that you can hide fees, that you can basically bundle fees into other fees. Working with someone you can trust really makes a big difference. So, the biggest thing that I would say is if you're in the process of looking at this and something doesn't feel right, don't sign until you understand exactly what you're looking at. Now, as far as things that you can do every month in the office to keep your bill low, that at least should keep your bill low. Like we said, those debit cards, specifically like HSA and flex spending cards, often have really, really low rates. So with those low rates, you should be getting a low rate from your processor passed on. If you take a lot of those cards, you can have a very, very significant savings. To give you an idea, I can have 2 offices on the exact same pricing that we offer all TDA Perks members. If they take a lot of high-end rewards cards, their effective rate each month might be 2.3, 2.4% even. That would be very high for us. But if they take a lot of debit cards, honestly, they can sometimes be as low as 1.3, 1.4, and that's with 0 changes on our end. It's just on the types of cards that they take. So, over a long period of time, that really, really adds up. 2, anytime you take a card where the card is present, so you're either swiping the card or using the chip, you get a lower rate on that card. It's normally about 0.3% lower, but keep in mind, 0.3% is normally all that we make on any account, like Best Card. That's not all that any credit card processor makes. But 0.3 is really a significant amount, and taking more and more of those cards where the card is present, you're going to be really happy with the overall savings. 3, anytime you have the opportunity, if it's a transaction that you ran earlier that day, rather than running a return, you should always run a void. A void basically cancels out the transaction so that you don't pay any transaction fees at all. If you run a return, you not only pay transaction fees on the original transaction, but there's also a much smaller return interchange rate that is paid to the card issuer. Best Card basically covers all of the return costs out of pocket, but you still pay that original transaction fee. So anytime that you notice that a transaction went through for possibly the wrong amount, or they want to pay on a different card, you should always be voiding a transaction rather than running a return to make sure that you're not paying fees for basically money that you're not collecting. 4, insurance card payments. So it's become really popular in the last couple of years for insurance companies to issue virtual credit cards rather than mailing a check or doing an automatic ACH. From their side, this makes complete sense because they're making their perks and rewards on those cards. But on your side, those are some of the most expensive cards out there. Like some of them cost over 3% in the direct cost that we have to pay to Visa or MasterCard. We always recommend if you can call the insurance company and request payment via check, and just a lot of times if you say it's for bookkeeping reasons, they'll meet that demand and that'll just save you a lot of money each month. It's one of those things like, if we were your processor, we'd make less money, but we're happy knowing that you're not paying that high rate on those kind of receivables. So basically, I kind of talked about how there's different ways to do pricing, and we really want to get into understanding how cost and credit card processing works. Basically, although this is a really simple question, getting the answer to that question is more difficult than you'd think because there are very many different types of cards. There are different ways of doing pricing. There are a lot of small monthly fees that, some offices may see very little of. Some, depending on the way you do things, might see more. So we kind of want to dive in and say, all right, how are they classifying all this and what should I be looking for? Now, as far as the easiest way to know if you're paying too much, you can very easily today take a recent statement and basically take the amount that you paid them for the month and divide that by the total amount you ran in credit card sales, and that gives you what we call your effective rate. Now, we like the effective rate as like a metric because while there are all sorts of tricks you can use to hide fees, you still know what you paid them in any given month, and you know what, how much you took in credit card revenue. So, that kind of gets around all of the little tricks that they can do to hide rates because you're still paying it. No, as far as a metric to set yourself by, our average office using Best Card, like our average dental office, pays an effective rate of 2.1%. In Texas, it's a little bit lower than that. It's about 2.08%. And the reason because of that is because you guys take a little bit more, like in like debit card payments than, some of our East Coast states where we have a lot of offices. But basically, if you're paying and, you come in and you see 2.5, 3%, that's really, really high. Sometimes, honestly, an office can be right at 2.1% with a prior processor, but take a lot of debit cards, and we still have a really great savings. But that does tell you, whether or not you're in the ballpark of where you should be on pricing. So when we look at how credit cards run and what the costs are, there's a really simple word that kind of covers the majority of your costs. Interchange is basically what a credit card processor pays to run any card that you give them. Now that rate changes depending on the type of card, but it's always the fixed rate for that specific card. So as soon as you run the card, it knows exactly what type of card it is and what the interchange rate it is it runs at. Now different types of cards have different rates. There are over 1,200 different cards nationwide, and each have their own interchange rate. But basically, with that interchange rate, every processor pays the same base cost. So we all have the same floor, and it's what we charge on top of that where we compete. Now, with a good credit card processor, interchange should be the largest portion of your monthly bill. Generally it's about 70 to 80% of what's on our statements goes straight out the door to Visa, MasterCard, for people that use us. But that's not always the case. So to give you an example of different interchange types, right? I have 3 different card types here. Like a regulated debit card is basically a debit card issued by a major bank, so any bank with more than $10 billion in assets, so Wells Fargo, Bank of America, things like that. That's about 60% of the debit cards in the U.S. When you swipe that card or use the chip, the rate it runs at is 0.05% and 22 cents per transaction. So think if you ran, just for easy math, one big sale of $10,000 on that card, it would cost you $5.22, right? A MasterCard World Elite Merit 3. Merit 3 means that it was taken in person. It's a really, really popular rewards card. You can see that the cost on that is quite a bit higher. You think with a $10,000 sale at 2.20%, that is basically $220 compared to $5. Last, we have a Visa Corporate Products Fleet Data 1. That's a high-end corporate reward card that is often what they issue for insurance payments. That has a rate of 2.65% and 10 cents per transaction. Some of the highest-end cards can get up and above 3%, but those are rare. But we're seeing more and more of those corporate insurance cards. So it's important to know, your cost on those is always going to be higher. Now, basically, because interchange is the same for all credit card processors, where we compete on top of that, what we charge is essentially, that's everything where every credit card processor is trying to beat one another. Now, understanding the different pricing models and ways that they can sometimes hide hidden fees is really important, because that's going to give you the knowledge that you need to understand why you're paying what you're paying every month. Basically, there are 3 different really popular types of pricing models for credit card processing. The first is called Interchange Plus. This one is relatively simple because you're paying that exact interchange cost we just talked about on any card you run. And then basically they'll add a rate on top of that, which is what they make. Sometimes there'll also be a per transaction fee. So nationwide, the average Interchange Plus is probably about 0.6% with about 20 cents per transaction. On tiered pricing, basically what they do is they take the 1,200 different cards and they group them together by similarly priced cards. And that price that they charge on those cards has their profit baked in, right? So if, there's a card that, runs at 2.65% and the rate they charge is 2.75%, then they basically make 0.1% or, $10 for every 10,000 processed. But it'll vary, even within that tier, their profitability will vary depending on the type of card that you took. Last, you have flat rate pricing, which is kind of tiered pricing to the extreme. You pay one flat rate for any card run. While this pricing is really easy to understand, it tends to be more expensive than the other models. But basically, each pricing model has its own pros and cons. You essentially, with Interchange Plus, the benefits are exactly what you're paying for. It's really easy on the statement to see exactly what you're paying and to who, right? That transparency is great. and it makes it a lot easier to make sure that your rates aren't going up over time. Now, the downside to that is your statements should have a lot more detail on them than, on other pricing methods. And a lot of times processors, when they try to sell this method, will make it sound like the rate that you're paying them on top of the interchange cost is all that you're paying. So I can tell you over the years, I talked to a lot of offices that thought that they were paying 0.95% with another processor, and then were amazed to look at a bill and realize it was, 3.5%. Basically, remember, that is the cost on top of that. So if any processor was trying to do a flat rate of 0.95%, they'd be losing money on virtually every transaction, right? Now, the only other con to Interchange Plus is that usually interchange rates change twice a year. It's usually in March and September. And when those change, it gets passed on directly. But all in all, it's a really good pricing method, and it's a really good way to know exactly what you're being charged, and being able to see that on a statement without having to go into a lot of complicated math and making a lot of guesses about what types of cards you took. Now, this is the sample Interchange Plus statement. This is one of ours. So you can see this office, you see there's like the discount one is like the first highlighted on the right. That's our plus rate of 0.3%. And then the interchange you see is a much larger number of $92.43. On the last page of that statement, you'll actually have an interchange breakdown. So they look at all of the different MasterCards they took that made up that $93.43. Basically, on Interchange Plus, like I said, it's easy to see exactly what you're paying. Now, on tiered pricing, the benefit is you have easier to read statements because it's usually broken down into a couple categories. You can tell if you're on tiered because you'll probably see qualified, mid-qualified, and non-qualified on the statement. Processors have complete control over the rates that they charge for each of those tiers. And the benefit can be if you're working with a good processor, that means that they don't necessarily go up all the time. Like we've had 2 rate increases on our tiered statements in 10 years. On our Interchange Plus pricing, we've never had a rate increase because all of those interchange changes get passed on directly. Now, the downside to Interchange Plus is that 1, you don't know what they're making on your account because you don't know the exact types of cards you're taking. 2, they can basically put whatever cards they want in any of those tiers. So you can think, one processor might have 20% of all of the cards available at one, 40% at another, and 20% at like the highest end for like the non-qualified. One other processor might decide to put literally 3 cards out of the 1,200 cards available at their best rate, and everything else downgrades to their non-qualified rate. So in that way, it's really easy to have a higher cost than you were kind of quoted. You were told rates of 1.45%, but everything's running at 3.45%. Last, processors may choose to change those rates very frequently, and it's hard to know what you're being charged on any individual transaction. So this is a sample tiered statement. So basically, we did the effective rate on the left-hand side, and this is a Texas office, and it's a relatively recent statement. On the right-hand side, basically, you'll see on like the MasterCard description, you see qualified, mid-qualified, and non-qualified, and each one of those has an amount next to it. Between tiered and Interchange Plus, we don't really have a preference. Our profitability that we'll offer any office is about the same either way. But, we normally try to match apples to apples just to make sure we're giving an accurate cost comparison without making a lot of assumptions. Last, we have flat rate pricing. And like I said, with flat rate pricing, the biggest pro for most people is that it's easy to understand. They know exactly what they're going to be charged on any transaction, right? The downside to flat rate pricing, which, and the other benefit is if you're a very small office and you're not doing a lot of volume, some big flat rate processors like the Square don't have any monthly fees. So, over time, the higher rates they charge really add up. But, if you're only intermittently practicing, that could be an option that's really, could work for your practice. But in the long run, it tends to be very expensive. When I set a flat rate, I have to assume that, there's a general distribution of cards, but what if an office gets too many high-end insurance payments? And, I know if I'm only charging 2.89 and a card costs more than that, I could actually end up losing money on transactions. That's like why you see the Square charges 2.89 for all swipe transactions, and I think it's 3.49 for all keyed transactions. They basically have to price it so high because they want to make sure that they're not losing money. As a dentist, if you think about this in dental terms, if you do a crown and a tooth cleaning and you have one price for both, you can't afford to give crowns at tooth cleaning prices, so you end up charging a lot more on every tooth cleaning to make sure that you don't lose money on all of your crowns. Generally, we don't do flat rate pricing unless an office really wants it, because we can't pass along the same value that we're kind of known for. But if an office is really insistent, that's always something we're willing to discuss. Now, I wanted to show this statement because this is one that came in very recently, and I know it's a little bit hard to read, but what this is apparently if you look in the top right corner, the office thought that they were on Interchange Plus 0.33% plus 10 cents per transaction pricing. That said, when you look at the the actual statement, you'll see a lot of cards down at the bottom there that have a 17 in parentheses next to it. This is something that the office would never probably have had the ability to know without knowing the industry as well as we do. In fact, when we did this cost comparison the first time, we thought that we had no savings and we couldn't figure out why their effective rate was so high with us. It turns out what's happening is every time you see that 17 in parentheses, they're charging 1.7% above the interchange cost, and they're not telling the office in a clear way that they're doing that. So that's really important to know, because if you're on a pricing method, you might think you're on one, and when you actually run the math, the numbers don't come out right. That's when you kind of start looking at, all right, let's understand exactly where this cost is coming from. And when we do our cost analysis, that's something we spend a lot of time on, is making sure that all of the numbers add up correctly, because we never want to quote a savings that's either way above or way below what an office would actually see with us. So in this case, this office was paying a lot more on about 60% of their transactions than they thought they were. Now, there are additional fees that are added by the card brands. The largest is called dues and assessments, which is basically between 0.12 and 0.15%. Like Visa has a different rate than MasterCard or Discover, for example. That is basically a hard cost to anyone running transactions. And then they usually have a per transaction fee of just less than 2 pennies. I don't know why they did less than 2 pennies. I'm sure it makes sense somewhere. But with that, that is a hard cost to any credit card processor. So if they say that they don't charge it, they're just absorbing it into their rate structure or higher fees in some other place. Additionally, there's quite a few, there's literally 30 of these different fees that are generally grouped into what's called NABU fees, which is network access and brand usage. That's also charged directly to the card issuer. These are generally very, very tiny fees. And as far as the reasons why they exist, it's basically, when Visa and MasterCard need to show a little bit of quarterly earnings profit, a new little tiny fee comes up. As far as what it costs your office on a monthly basis, they're generally very small individually. But, over time, over billions of dollars processed, it makes sense for Visa and MasterCard to add these. Now, we do see, like I said, a lot of processors will either group these together or claim that they don't charge them at all. Every time we've taken a deep dive into the numbers and drilled down on what it would actually cost, for those grouped fees, we've always seen a pretty significant rate increase on top of that. So when we, when Best Card does those fees, we pass them through exactly at cost with no surcharge. Now, additional fees added by the processor, these are fees that usually have a reason that the processor is charging them, like it's a cost that they incur, but not always. And sometimes these fees are really negotiable. So statement fees are basically, we pay, First Data is our main back-end clearinghouse. We pay to have an account on file with them. We have to have a statement fee so that we're not losing money on all of those. Regulatory product fees are basically, we have to submit all credit card processing to the IRS. That was actually something instituted after 9/11 because 9/11 was actually funded by terrorists using basically bogus merchant processing accounts and running overseas cards. So we're charged for that service and we pass on that cost. Our statement fee is $7.95, for example. Our regulatory product fee is $3.95, and those are our only 2 monthly fees. PCI Compliance is something that Visa and MasterCard requires. It's basically, you can think of it like HIPAA for credit cards. Just making sure you're doing things in a secure way, and the requirements that you have to meet change depending on how you run your cards. So if you have a terminal that connects over a phone line, it's generally a really simple questionnaire. If you have an online system that runs through your computers and integrates into your software, it's usually a little bit more expensive. PCI shouldn't be very expensive, but they do. That's one area where, you tend to see a lot of fees added on. Like our annual charge for PCI is just $36. But we tend to see between $90 and $250 kind of on average. Actually, and one other thing that we see a lot is a lot of statements that we review for dental offices are getting non-compliance fees, which are, usually $18.95 to I've seen as high as $50 a month. PCI compliance is something like technically that the dental office has to be the one to take care of. But I mean, we have a whole division of our company where we have people that help with PCI every day, answer questions. We'll even walk you through the questionnaire and the scans and work with your IT. And like I said, it's something that is required but doesn't have to be an expensive cost. And like I said, if there's fees outside of that, a lot of those are just extra profit centers, usually, added in by the processor and may or may not be completely negotiable. Which kind of brings us to the next part. There are things that you should always know before you sign a credit card processing contract. The first and a very, very important one is that the rates are not always set in stone. So I'm a lawyer. Every credit card processing contract I've ever reviewed gives them the ability to raise rates, usually with 30 days notice. Sometimes it's less than that. Now, this makes sense in the credit card processing world because if the interchange rates go up drastically, they have to be able to adjust their costs. But of course, some processors abuse this. So when we on statements that we review for dental offices, we tend to see rate increase notices on about 25 to 50% of notices, depending on the processor. Now, some processors can go years without that, and that's great. That's the situation you should be in. But if you're getting your rates increased 2 to 4 times per year, those costs really add up really, really quickly. Recently, we've seen an increase in a lot of rate increase notices because there have been some very large acquisitions in the credit card processing industry, and every time that happens, they have to pay off those billion-dollar mergers somehow. It usually kind of filters down until all of a sudden your costs are going up. So if you use payment software that automatically posts into Dentrix or any of the CareStream softwares, those companies have been acquired recently, and we've been seeing some rate increases on statements that we've been reviewing. Like I said, it doesn't have to be that way. Our last rate increase on our tiered pricing was in 2013, when basically there was a big increase in credit card costs, but there was actually a decrease in debit costs, so we lowered our debit costs at that time. With the Interchange Plus rates, like I said, because it tracks exactly, we've never had a rate increase on that pricing system. Now, this kind of pairs with the next part where you always want to ask about early termination fees. It's really common for processors to have a contract, 3 years is normally pretty standard, and if you leave before that term, you might have to pay a fee to basically cancel your contract. This can be a flat fee, normally $295 to $2,000 is average, but sometimes they'll do what's called lost profitability or liquidated damages clauses, which means that they can charge a certain amount per month times all the months remaining on the contract. So one is if you have a mandatory minimum payment amount, they could charge basically say you have $40 in mandatory minimum fees. They could charge $40 a month times 24 months left on the contract, hypothetically. That's a cost of almost $1,000. Some of the most expensive contracts out there will take the average of your highest processing months times what they expected to make in their profit, even if they're not going to be your processor anymore, and multiply that times the months remaining on the contract. So we have one here that, that's almost $3,000, and that is not uncommon. Some of those contracts even automatically renew at the end of the term so that, a whole new term starts and that early termination fee penalty is carried across. So the question you always want to ask, and you always want to get it in writing, is there any early termination fee? Will you waive that? And if they say no, that's usually a sign that, those costs might go up, because the situation you can find yourself in is that basically you have an early termination fee, your costs go up pretty drastically, and all of a sudden it's really expensive to stay in the long run, but it's really expensive to leave in the short run. The example I'll use is we had an office that contacted us again recently. They left us in 2014, and when they reviewed their statements, they noticed that their rates had gone up from what they were promised. When they went to basically try to cancel that account and come back to us, they were told that their 3-year contract had just automatically renewed the month before, and that their early termination fee was $107,000. Now, obviously, that's a very, very extreme case, but at the end of the day, you never want to find yourself in a position where you can't make the decision that's best for your business because of a contract you've signed. Kind of to that end, the only early termination fee that Best Card charges is a flat $25. And I'll tell you, the only reason why we have that is because we have basically like on file fees that we have to pay for 6 months after an account is closed. So if you leave us, we're paying that for 6 months. It comes out to about $30. 25 we consider is basically close enough. Sometimes with those early termination fees, that is going entirely to the salesperson, like the commission sales rep. So it's something that should be very, very negotiable. And if they're a processor that's acting in good faith, they should be confident that their rates are low enough and that their customer service is good enough that you shouldn't have to pay a fee to leave them. Last, and this is another important one, you always want to avoid equipment leases. For a company like ours, this could be a great way to make a lot of money, but I'd rather sleep well at night than, have people signing contracts that are so expensive in the long term and so difficult to get out of. So almost every lease contract I've ever seen is what's called non-cancelable, which means if you cancel the contract, you owe the entire remaining balance in one lump sum. So if you're leasing a terminal, you might pay, like $40 per month is pretty average, honestly. You might be paying $40 a month for a 4 or 5 year term, which means you're paying thousands of dollars for that terminal and you still don't own it at the end of the lease. Most credit card processing equipment can be purchased, at direct costs for less than $300. So I always recommend always buy your equipment. If you have, they'll pitch leases as it's easier if you have a problem that you can just send it back to us. Generally, that's not the case. If it's under factory warranty, which you'd have if you own it, they basically, do the exact same thing that any processor would do at that point of getting you a new one and sending it back to the factory for the warranty. If it's outside of the 1 year warranty, they'll almost always have you pay a restocking fee, which is usually about equal to the value of the equipment itself. So that can be an easy way to, save yourself thousands of dollars on equipment. Equipment tends to work for a long time. It doesn't tend to change that often. And like I said, that's why that's something I would always recommend, as it should be entirely negotiable. They should offer you the ability to buy equipment. And if they don't, that should be kind of a red flag. So at the end of the day, there's a lot of things that you can do, a lot of areas that you can negotiate. We do cost analysis all the time for offices that are looking at another processor. With that, we'll dive in, we'll do all the math for you. We have guaranteed rates we offer to all TDA members. And we basically just say, hey, on these rates, here's exactly what your savings would be with us when we look at all of the rates, all of the monthly fees. Here's what we can do. I can tell you, the average office saves about $1,860. It's normally about a 27% savings over their prior processor. And, the beauty of being endorsed by the TDA Perks program is if you call TDA, they're happy to say, yeah, we have members that have used them and we've heard good things. We have hundreds of TDA members that use us currently. We're always happy to say, here's a doctor that's kind of nearby. Give them a call, give his staff a call. Ask them what they really think about working with us. In our industry, it's really easy to make a lot of big promises and then never deliver. We just really view ourselves as, if we can offer consistent savings and excellent customer service, that's why we were started as a company. So if there's ever any questions, you're always welcome to reach out to us. You're always welcome to call me directly. My name is Phil. You can ask for me and, basically call and we can just say, here's exactly what we can do. Or if you have a question, here's exactly what you need to ask your current processor to get your rates lowered. I don't mind taking those calls, and, anything we can do to help, that's kind of what we're for. So Josh, I'll kind of turn it back over to you, but if there's any questions, I'd love to kind of answer anything that people don't know.
Excellent. And, great information, Phil. We really appreciate it. And, again, it's, Phil and the Best Card team are very accessible. There are time for questions up. Looks like we've got one coming in here. Phil, our current credit card processing company works through our dental software. The monthly bill seems pretty high, but I think we're locked into this one company. Is there anything that you can do for the office in that situation?
So actually, yeah, that's something that we hear a lot. Basically those integrated systems, what happens is, a credit card company, approach them, they have an agreement, and I'm guessing the dental software companies get a pretty substantial amount of revenue from those. But because of that, their rates tend to be more expensive and a lot less competitive. With that, basically a couple years ago, BestCard built out a system we call PayLink that automatically posts into several of the largest softwares out there. Like we post into Dentrix, EagleSoft, Open Dental, PracticeWorks, and SoftDent is coming online soon. Sometimes, if you really like the integrated features, you can take a statement from another processor or a rate quote from another processor, and a lot of times get them to meet it in the short run. In the long run, like I said, we just generally see them be a little bit less pricing competitive than other companies that don't have those integrations. There are things that you can do, and honestly, working with a non-integrated processor, it's a pretty minimal step to post a payment. I've been on dental softwares, and it's generally about a 5 to 10 second process. But if that's something that's absolutely necessary, there are steps that you can take to kind of get that bill lowered, or work with other companies that can have very, very similar, functionality. So yeah, I guess that's all I have on that.
Thanks, Phil. Let's see. Now, again, we do have some time for questions, so if you got them, type them in so we can make sure that Phil has all that information. He can answer those questions for you. Oh, here's another one. I think my practice is on medical rates, but the costs seem higher than you say they should be. Are medical or dental rates more expensive?
So I think I know the company you're talking about. So here's a really important thing to know with credit card processing rates. So neither Visa, MasterCard, or Discover have distinct medical rates, right? Interchange in that point, there's different levels of interchange, but it's set by the volume that you do. So unless you're a monster practice that is doing more than $10 million a month in credit card sales, your interchange rates are basically set regardless of if you're a dental office or a clothing boutique or anything like that. Now, with that, medical rates, only American Express offers medical rates, and it's set up by your service industry code number. So basically, if you're a dental office, I think it's 2077. But basically, every time that any credit card processor had your account and American Express saw that that was your service industry, like your federal service industry code number, you would be getting the correct medical dental rates for your practice. A lot of processors, it's always everyone's trying to say that they have a specific end that's going to lower your costs. At the end of the day, it's really, how hard they're willing to work and, what cost they're willing to charge. There's no kind of magic medical rates that are going to get you a big savings. It's what they're going to charge on top of the interchange costs that everyone is, charged to run the cards. So, if you're doing if you're told you have medical rates and they're high, any other company, would be able to say, we have the exact same base costs, and then let's see, we'll work for less. So like I said, the specific medical rates generally don't have a big influence. Some other things that you'll hear, you might get a call saying that they have wholesale rates. Wholesale and merchant processing just means that basically they underwrite their own risk, and our cost to underwrite risk is literally a couple dollars for every $10,000 we run. So it's not a significant cost. It all just comes down to, what they're willing to do and what price they're going to charge. Does that make sense?
Yeah, actually, we've got another question here, and it goes back to the compliance issue and security. This is a really good question. We get calls every week saying that we're not compliant or secure. I think these are sales calls, but is there anything we need to be doing for security? And if you can touch on that, Phil, that'd be great. And who do they need to go through?
Okay, so that's actually a really, really good question because we get that one all the time too. Basically, there are companies that will just call and try to scare you and say that you're not compliant. The only entity out there that has any interest and any knowledge of your credit card processing, compliance, is your current credit card processor. I, as a credit card processor, can't log in and see anyone else's book of business and see, oh, they're not compliant with this other company. They'll a lot of times say that they're from like a government agency or a compliance agency. There is no like PCI police out there demanding that people be compliant. It all goes through your credit card processor. Now, that said, we want to keep everyone compliant because that protects you from liability in the like event of a data breach. It also, you know, like I said, there's like those non-compliance fees that are charged. So you always want to be compliant, but somebody randomly calling you up, if they're not from your credit card processor, is just trying to sell you on a different credit card processing company. Now, that said, credit card processing compliance changes, like I think I said before, it changes depending on how you accept cards. So there will always be an annual questionnaire, and your current credit card processing company will set you up with basically a PCI company. There are like 8 different PCI companies out there that offer the questionnaire and may offer scans too, if you need to have those depending on how you're set up. So any credit cards that run through any online system, like even if it's a terminal that connects to your office internet, they need to do a scan on that office internet network to make sure it's secure. Those are generally done, like there's a couple scan vendors, but they'll run the scans, and then basically you will work with either the PCI company that your processor sets you up with, or ideally your processor, to get that addressed and resolved. Like I don't know if I said before, but like we have like basically 3 people on staff who their entire job is to work with all of our offices on their PCI compliance issues. So essentially, you know, they'll walk them through the questionnaire over the phone generally, and then we'll do all of the scans and work with their IT to rectify any issues. Like, you know, there's a reason, like currently we're at about 92% compliance. And, you know, in the industry at large, we're guessing just from like the statements we've seen and the non-compliance charges that we've seen, like we think that generally nationwide, only about 40 to 50% of people are compliant at any given time. And then, like I said, that's just anecdotal from all of the statements that we review, but we review, you know, thousands of statements on a yearly basis. So I guess any other questions or, no, go ahead.
I'm looking here at our question box here, and again, we've got some time, so please type in your questions, and we will have them answered. So we do have some more time for that. So just give it a few,
no problem.
Few seconds here, see if we've got anyone kind of chiming in again. And you know, Phil, first off, you know, I really appreciate this information and for your time being here today, and for every TDA member that's on this call, you know, thank you for taking the time to be with us as well. So what's the best number to get you guys at? I know that we've got the number 877-739-3952 on our landing page on the Perk site for you guys. Is that the best number to get in touch with you guys?
Yeah, I mean, that's generally the easiest, because you call, you'll always talk to a live person right away. If there's anyone particular that you want to talk to, like me, just ask for me by name. You know, we're still a small business too, so, you know, I mean, I'm always easy to reach, and we've built our entire business around making sure that just if there's any question, if there's any problem, you always have someone to talk to so that you're not kind of dealing with it alone. We know how important your time is in the office. We know how much time you guys spend on hold with insurance companies, for example. You know, we just make sure it's not that way with us. We want the credit card processing to be the easiest part of your business. So yeah, 877-739-3952. And yeah, any question from there, like I said, we have a really knowledgeable staff, and we like to think we're nice people, so.
Yeah, you guys are definitely nice people. And again, I always take great calls from TDA members who are really happy with BestCard. Just again, it's the member service that, you know, is extremely valuable to us, and they do a great job with that. If you do want to take a look at BestCard information, you can go to the TDA Perks website, tdaperks.com, and you just look under credit card processing. They're the only credit card processing company, I should say, that we endorse. So just go to credit card processing, you'll be able to find them out, to find a little bit more information on BestCard, and just, you know, take a look. There's a contact number there. There's an email to get in touch with the folks over there as well. I don't see any more questions coming in, so I'm going to finish up the webinar now. I do want to, you know, make sure everyone does know that Perks is a member benefit, and we have several other endorsed vendors for you to take advantage of. Again, the resources in our resource section, articles and journal articles and archive webinars, podcasts, everything like that. So definitely come back to the site at tdaperks.com and check it out. But also with any vendor, and obviously I can get any questions that you may have. If you just want to call me, Josh here at the TDA, it's 512-443-3675, or you can email me at josh@tda.org, and I can relay anything that you have to Phil if you just wanted to handle it that way. But again, we do appreciate your time, and Phil, appreciate your time as well, and that's great information. Do you have anything else to add, or?
Nope, just honestly, I know it can be a really sensitive subject, so if you'd rather reach out through Josh, our big thing is we don't do telemarketing. We don't try to bother people when they have other things to do. But, we do view ourselves still as we were started as a member benefit for the Colorado Dental Association. That's still our mentality. So any questions that we can ever answer, through any method you want to get them to us, we're always happy to do what we can to help. So.
Excellent. And thanks everyone again, and please have a safe and happy Friday. So have a great weekend. Take care.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Bye.